I'm Samantha Brentmore.
And I'm Rose Dioro. And this is the Rosemoor Roundtable.
We wanted it to be a gathering, like a community event where it builds superfans, it builds community, it gets people in front of readers they might not know, and then for the socially awkward introvert, you're like, okay, well, I watched this panel and I know that Janice Whittaker writes romantic suspense as Gemma Westbrook. I didn't know that, so now I'm going to go see her because I like romantic suspense, and I thought she wrote cowboy novels.
That was an excerpt from a roundtable discussion we had in June at Book Bonanza with a group of listeners as we dug into their perspective on finding and engaging with your bookish community.
That clip represents just a small portion of the conversations we've been having for the last month, as we've been collecting feedback via one-on-one conversations, DMs, and an online survey.
Today's episode will feature more of that input as we explore part 3 of our 5-part discussion on romance narration and internet culture, focusing on finding community.
And trying to better understand what folks are looking for and how they find it online and in person.
As a reminder, this 5-part conversation is different than our usual roundtable that features a variety of guests, as we wanted to dig in deeper on some trickier topics, bringing some of the in-depth conversations we've been having privately to the roundtable in an effort to hopefully stimulate your own conversations with your networks and communities.
We've tried to approach this with a journalistically neutral stance as much as possible and try to leave our personal experience separate and clearly delineated as part of this deep dive.
To be clear, we really don't claim to have answers, make conclusions, or be a representative of every community within the romance audiobook sphere. We may get things wrong because of our own perspectives and experiences or a limited data set.
If there is some factual error, we want to appropriately correct that, so please do email us at rosemoorroundtable@gmail.com.
We hope that what we will unpack over the next few episodes will spur some reflection, both for yourself and your communities, and that you have those conversations yourselves, building on some of the thoughts that have been digging at us. Okay, let's get into it and start like last time with a little history.
So much of the history that we covered last time is applicable here, with a push to show up online as an author, narrator, and reader in a post-2011 ACX indie boom to both market your own books or discover books as a reader. Conventions really get a boom in the last 4 years, with many various shapes and sizes cropping up to pick from, with large ones like Book Bonanza, which is organized by Colleen Hoover and her sisters, and smaller ones like Charm City. The first convention was started in 1982 by the editors of the Romantic Times, which was a magazine, and continued until 2018 when the Romantic Times Book Lovers Convention closed. And according to Wikipedia, from 1982 to 2018, the magazine organized the Romantic Times Book Lovers Convention, and several thousand people attended the annual convention, and it featured author signings, a costume ball, and a male beauty pageant. So there's a lot of elements like that we see in conventions today.
I want to know if anybody listening attended Romantic Times Book Lovers Convention. Like, what was the costume ball and male beauty pageant like? Like, that seems crazy to me, but like also could be so fun. So, but if you went,
it does make me wonder if these are models that were in the
it must
that
be
is
right.
Something we see at conventions now is sometimes that models will be in the mix. I don't know that they're part of a beauty pageant, but there are other things I've like featured in parties in some way, or other ways that they're incorporated that's different than the narrators and authors who are attending. So if you have had that experience, if you were at one of those conventions, definitely let us know. And also if you go to conventions now, I would love to hear about some of the differences, because I can imagine the similarities based on that description, but I don't know, we'd be curious to hear from you. So go back to that email address we talked about earlier. Blogs were the first place that folks got recommendations and formed community, leaving messages directly on the websites of readers, and that was back in the early 2000s. And then Facebook groups such as Aural Fixation, which I think most of you are probably familiar with if you're listening to this podcast, but if not, it's a romance audiobook Facebook group that many quote as their first like online community space in that way, the first Facebook group they've joined. And that started in 2016. Narrator groups that are meant to create narrator communities and are focused either on just romance narration or ACX narration started to form in 2011. TikTok and Clubhouse and Twitter start to form more public-facing communities, while Facebook and Discord stay relatively private or on invitation to join. So like private groups. Patreon started in 2013 and Discord in 2015. And while we couldn't get any exact dates about when the romance community popped up on those platforms, from conversations with folks within the community, it sounds like around 2018 is when romance, people in the romance space really started using those platforms. Book clubs move online en masse during the 2020 pandemic, and people who never had community before, in terms of book community, find it in these online manifestations, and it became sort of their local book club, even though it was in an online space. And we've heard from lots of folks that those are their buddies now. Like, these are the people that they talk to every day, they text with every day, and a lot of those relationships, as we said, really came about because of these pandemic-era online book clubs. Author support groups are something we know just a little about, because we ourselves are not authors. And so we don't have exact data on when author support groups started, in particular in online spaces. We just have heard from a lot of authors that that's sort of always been a part of their community, in entering the writing space as romance authors. It's just something that sort of always existed. From one author, we heard that the reason these groups are vital to her is so that, she says, how do I know I'm getting fucked or being crazy, in terms of talking about, making, signing contracts and things. Like, you need to be able to lean on the other folks in your community who are doing the same things so that you can learn from their experiences and vice versa.
Yeah, I think that's a really important thing to pull out here, is that there's a through line, whether or not you're a reader or an author or a narrator, or increasingly so kind of like content creator, community groups, and like private servers, is to be able to compare notes in like this wild west of like, well, we're putting our books out there and agents are talking to us and I need to sort of compare notes, or like, I just started to discover books. It's really like helping each other seems to be a really key piece of what's important about community, and has been in the through line of its history. And I think, okay, so like, how do you find these communities and what does that look like today? Well, obviously what it looked like, in 2014 or 2011, like as ACX shows up, looks very different than 2024. But I'm going to focus, and I think we're going to focus today on like where we are now. So if you're a reader, how do you find what book you want to read next, or people to talk to about it, or share your creative edits with? If you're a narrator, how do you figure out who to follow, who to talk to, where to show up to establish a brand and like find community and working opportunities, kind of similar to what we talked about last episode. So a big piece is that you start to boil yourself down to your interests and keywords so that your Google and social media searches bring up the most relevant information. Identifying yourself via authors you like or subgenres becomes an important way to find your community. Some things that we heard from people were that I think that it is really helpful as a narrator to identify the type of work I focus on, so I'm associated with that work and I'm easier to cast. That can pigeonhole you, though. And I think that in conversation with this narrator, it was like, oh, well, now this is how I figure out authors that are writing that kind of content, and based on those tags. Another person said, I just want to read romantasy with decent spice, but just Googling romance novels was overwhelming, and I'm not on social media, so I just try to search book sites by keywords and hope for the best. Another person who's a content creator said, as a content creator, my success is tied to meeting expectations, so I really lean into the tropes and subgenres I try to associate with. And I think meeting expectations means like, I followed you, you're the one who does funny memes about monster romance. I think this is like, I'm going to interject a sidebar, like personal thing. I just would posit that this kind of drive to keywords is what has pushed us into a general conversation, a trope-heavy focus, as we like market titles. I have no data on this though, but this is just my like connection that I'm making as like everybody was like, yeah, no, you need your keywords, you need to put the tags, you need to put the things, and I think that changes the way we talk about art and work. but that's just a personal opinion. Okay. If you're a narrator who's not online or just starting to get online, you may have somebody who's acting as a well-intentioned guide that reaches out. They could either be a reader or another narrator that has resources and wants to help you find your way with recommended people to follow and engage with. And those recommendations really start to define how your feed starts to look on these sites. One narrator said, I had a fan reach out and tell me to get online and gave me a list of people to follow. Another person said, a fellow narrator told me to get online because I was being mentioned in a certain online book club and I could interact there.
And I just want to add, in past conversations with some of these well-intentioned guides, it seems like the impetus from what they share is that, they want to hear a voice they really love and consume a lot of these books and want more of that voice to show up in the books that they're listening to. So it is kind of like a mutually beneficial connection to make, because as a reader, as a listener, you get to hear more of the people that you love. And as the narrator, obviously, you get more work.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think it is, from what we've gathered, it really is not anything beyond just trying to, this very passionate sensibility of like, oh, I want more of you. I want you connected. I want people to be able to, like we said last episode, I want people to be able to find you.
Absolutely.
In a meaningful way. Already talked about this a little bit, but a lot of the conversations highlighted that many readers start by following the authors that they know and that they enjoyed to stay up on releases, like in a series that they started and really want to know. And then they kind of go from there, so that if authors recommend other authors, then they'll follow them there. But they really do start with kind of authors that they knew and love, and then can start to find their community in the comments of those posts. A theme we'll see pop up here in a little bit is that, like, starting to find your community comes from like, well, we all were talking about how much we loved X author and we were bantering in the comments, and then it like moved into DMs or something like that. A content creator I spoke with highlighted that they started as a lurker, where they just like were looking at content, not creating their own. And they really loved the memes or general content from a creator on TikTok, Instagram, X, and that by following them, like they found their people. And I would extrapolate this, that I think that this is like likely other people's experiences, that you follow those creators, you then are people that are all kind of following this person, again, commenting on a meme or sharing the same thing. And, you kind of find your own little micro community there. Instagram has just started this thing recently where you can have like a channel in your DMs that is a one-sided conversation. So like there are some people that I've followed on Instagram for a while that are content creators, and they now have a place in DMs where they're just kind of like posting, and that you can only respond, I think, in like emojis or like poll yes, no buttons. There's not like a chat back and forth. But for some folks that have these really big followings and are posting a lot of like memes or other content, this is a way for them to engage that audience and have that community on a smaller level.
Can I ask some questions about that?
Please do.
I've seen those pop up and I wasn't really sure what they were. And you were always much more on top of like all these new fangled things that show up online. Do you have a sense, or do you know what that does to kind of cultivate a smaller community? Like, how is it different than just posting on their regular like grid or stories or whatever?
So one of the things that a lot of algorithm gurus preach and talk about is this like importance of the DM response. And a lot of people have created their followings based on being very responsive in their DMs. And so
which we've heard from folks, even just from narrators, who've cited that as a way that they've really built connections with people.
Absolutely. And I mean, like, I'm somebody who's very communicative in my DMs. I started... Well, anyways, I think it's something that it's a very normalized practice in a lot of ways. And it comes from people saying like, you look like you're an engaged brand. There's a lot of reasons to do it. You get to a certain scale and that becomes unsustainable. So you'll start to see, people who are known for engaging DMs, right? Not just, you posted a thing, I gave you a heart. Yes, very cool, one sentence. But people who are known for like carrying on back and forth full conversations, they'll start posting and saying like, hey guys, I know I haven't responded to DMs in a while. I'm going to get through all of them this weekend. Like they very consciously talk about how they respond to people and that they will get back to you. And it becomes a thing that they need to do. So these channels then become a way to kind of lessen that load and that expectation to say, well, now I'm going to start giving you information. It'll be in your DMs. You'll find it. And it also doesn't go away the way that an Instagram story does.
Oh, so it gets sent, if you sign up for it, it gets sent to your DMs.
Like, you now have a tab that is channels.
I see. So it's not like you're going somewhere to check it. It's you're getting these personal messages, even though you can't respond in a more personal way beyond an emoji.
Correct. So like, let's say I'm, mostly they're like slowly rolling this out, but like, let's say I'm an author and like the way that I would use my fan group a lot is to talk about new releases or something like that. Like now I can treat it as like a newsletter meets fan group, but there's not a comment section that I am engaging with or anything else like that.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. It's a new feature that who knows, like any of them, if it will die or be the thing that thrives.
Right.
So then other things, like if you start showing up in comments a lot, you're meeting your friends, like, oh, we're all talking about how we really like this author. Like somebody might invite you to then go say, hey, every time X content creator posts about Shell Bliss, you and I are both here. Are you following Shell Bliss in her Facebook group? No. Okay, come here. So then there's like that pipeline to like, you can get more specific. You can follow an author on their fan page or a narrator on their fan page. And you can really like narrow down that interest and find community there in terms of what you enjoy.
And those invitations themselves, I think, speak to this desire that we're hearing from people about. This is the space we go to for community, and I just want it to keep growing and getting stronger and stronger all the time. Like that doesn't, I imagine someone who did what you just described, like they don't benefit in any way from that, right? Except that the community they're a part of has just more strength behind it, more people who are showing up. And if people are showing up, then it will continue to exist.
Yeah. I mean, I feel mixed about, like personal opinions I will add for the later, but I do think that there are two, like, yes, I think that is right. And also, I think that there is an incentive for some people to get... People can be very numbers driven. And so if they're trying to hit targets, I think TikTok gets this language into like a lot of people's minds because as we previously discussed, there's like this barrier to entry on TikTok. If you want to go live on TikTok, either as a guest or as a host, you have to have 1,000 followers. And so like it focuses on the idea that you need to have a certain amount of followers. So like even if only 20 of us love this book or this author, it feels like it's not legitimized until it hits that mark. And I think some of the idea of growth behind these groups is trying to either legitimize themselves or get kind of more people. But I think fundamentally, at least in our conversations, people are like, I just want to share this with more people. I want to be able to talk to more people about this thing. Yeah, exactly. Okay, and then in-person community. So conventions are a big way that you take these online interactions offline and meet face-to-face. We've both personally talked to many people who enjoy conventions as an opportunity to meet their online groups in real life, often for the first time. We saw a lot of this post-2020 where people got into these online groups and then their first convention out was the first time they had met people. One woman I spoke to at Charm City said, I don't know anyone here, but I loved the idea of the panels and a smaller convention, and I came hoping to meet some new friends and make connections, which I did, which I think is like a really lovely like sentiment where you're like, oh, that's wonderful. I love this. And then there's in-person meetups for narrators, and that could be events and conventions like APAC. There's a voice convention that happens in Atlanta. But like in this kind of post-studio, post-green room connection era, there is a real hunger for folks to go meet in person. And then there are like retreats that aren't as big as conventions. I know narrator.life does one in Palm Springs. And I know that just recently, I believe it's Joel Frumkin hosted one that's like on a cruise. Who doesn't want to go on a cruise?
Doing it again. This round 2 is happening.
Amazing. So like then there's a number of those that like we don't have a full list of, but that are starting to crop up, which are these retreats. I think there was one that happened in the Northeast this last year. And it really just speaks to the fact that like an in-person community interaction really, I think, is different than what you can find online.
Right. And for narrators, you know, as you said, most of us are not in studios the majority of the time when we're working these days. And so the work we're doing is so lonely. And on top of that, we're also most frequently serving as our own engineers as well. So we don't even have that. We don't have directors. We don't have engineers. It's just us. And it's not all the time, but it is I would say, I know for myself and pretty much every other narrator I speak to, that is the name of the game for most people the majority of the time right now. And so it's lonely. It can be really lonely, even when you're collaborating on a project. You know, if it's a dual narration, duet narration, there's only that collaboration often doesn't involve a whole lot. You know, you're kind of talking about voices and you're talking about pronunciation, but it doesn't open up a lot of opportunity for connection, real connection. So when speaking to So what we're hearing from narrators is what you just said, that, you know, we really are seeking out these in-person opportunities. And I think, I know I speak for myself when I say this, and also in speaking to a lot of other narrators, it's not just going to these narrator-specific meetups. I think in-person convention hold a lot of value for narrators for that reason, the chance to connect with other narrators, in addition to all the other reasons that you might want to attend a convention. I know for me personally, that's a pretty big motivator, is that opportunity. So in speaking to a narrator about a private group online, like a Facebook group, this person said that the group saved my life many times in the early days, just having colleagues to talk to about this stuff being, you know, the stuff of the work that we do. Because again, when would you do that otherwise? There's no water cooler talk. There's no place to go.
And nobody else, I mean, we've had this conversation too before, and it is reflected from a lot of narrators, which is, you know, audiobook work itself is its own unique little bubble in the acting world and in the VO world. And then one step further, what we go through as romance audiobook narrators is even more unique of an experience. And so being able to have a community where you can, like the author said in their author group, am I getting fucked by this or am I going crazy? Like being able to have peers to go and be like, is this kind of contract normal? Do these people normally work this way? Is like really invaluable.
And to your point about specific to romance, there are groups that are just about that because the content is sensitive, right? So it brings up, we've talked about this a lot, especially in some of our roundtables with other narrators, that the mental health piece of this is big and something really important to pay attention to. And when you are recording really sensitive content, really intimate content in this day and age when dark romance is so present and such a big part of our industry, it's so important to be taking care of yourself. And sometimes it's hard to know how to do that. So these romance-specific narrator spaces, I think a lot of people turn to figure out how to navigate that, right? And just kind of talk it out sometimes. From readers and bookish content creators, they speak on the power of finding your people and feeling seen and normalized. Some of the responses we heard from folks is from some of these bookish content creators and readers. Being able to showcase my reviews and bookish collage edits has helped me make amazing lifelong friendships with so many like-minded people who love what I love. So creating something that people then comment on, sort of what we were talking about just a minute ago, you kind of have people self-identifying, saying, hey, I love this too, and I'm excited about what you're doing. I see you. And that can really grow into a real relationship and friendship. From another person, it's found people who are just like me and love to read, because I swear there's no one around me who likes to do it. And I think they mean read. So it's hard to know. Like, it's hard to know when you see people out in the world even, are they going to be into what you're into? So maybe there are readers around this person, but when you show up online, even readers and content creators are creating their own brands, right? In a lot of ways. Like they're saying, this is what I like. These are the people I follow. This is the content I'm putting up and celebrating in my online social media space. And so it's like wearing a name tag that says, I'm into what you're into. You know?
Yeah.
You don't really get that out in the real world.
Mm-hmm.
From another respondent, the accessibility of authors and narrators has meant I'm able to share my love for their work and creative endeavors with them directly. I've also formed friendships with fellow readers, found freedom of expression after deconstruction from purity culture.
Mm.
I've heard that from a lot of people as well, that they turn
Mm-hmm.
to romance specifically as an antidote to whatever they were brought up in. And so then finding people who will celebrate this thing that you were taught was shameful is sort of an inherent way to build deep connection pretty quickly.
100%. And I mean, I think that, there's a lot of writing and research that has been done about this when you talk about social media and it gets skewered for a lot of things. It is frequently brought up that one of the positives of social media are that marginalized groups or people that find that they couldn't have a voice or people who are, in a situation where they're all surrounded by people who think one way, but they think, differently, they are able to connect and find people who, normalize the things that feel very inherent to who they are as a person. And that's a very positive thing about online connection.
Mm-hmm. And on building relationships online that are then maintained offline, we heard from someone who said, I think relationships became more personal as we moved into private conversations via DMs. I can safely say that I made amazing friends in this community, and it all came from the shared interest in romance audiobooks. So that speaks to your earlier point about there's something about those DMs versus being in the comments that feels really connecting to people, that kind of takes those connections, those relationships to another level of friendship versus we just exist in this same space together and, kind of comment under the same content creator stuff or whatever it is.
Right. It's more like how some people talk about like male communication like looks out and is like shoulder to shoulder, and female connection is like face to face communication. Yeah. And I feel like the like posting in comments is like the shoulder to shoulder. Like we're both saying this, we're saying it out loud, and I'm saying like I see you and whatever. But a DM really does feel like you've like pivoted and saying like oh I see you, and like can get a little bit more specific.
This is completely off topic, but but you're just making me remember. It's like, I don't know, People Magazine or one of those kinds of things. They used to always post those pictures of celebrity couples and like analyzing who's leading
with the lines?
the couple. Yeah. Are you leaning? Were they leaning into each other? Were they leaning out? Who's in charge in this relationship? Just a walk down memory lane.
I love those so much, and I put so much credence in it. As somebody who also thinks I can't take a solidly good photo, why would I trust like a random paparazzi angle to like deep dive into like what Jennifer Aniston and Brad Pitt really think about each other?
That's right.
Oh man.
So for professional content creators, they're finding work, building careers in this space, and here's what some of them had to say to us. Stepping into the reader community was very easy for me. It organically turned into work as authors reached out asking for help in promoting their audiobooks. Someone else said, making connections. Sometimes it's a connection through a connection through a connection that puts me in touch with people I resonate with. Okay, and so in terms of opportunities for professional content creators, they're using online spaces to build their careers. So from one person we heard, stepping into the reader community was very easy for me. It organically turned into work as authors reached out asking for help in promoting their audiobooks. Another person said, making connections. Sometimes it's a connection through a connection that puts me in touch with people I resonate with. And so building a brand and pursuing business opportunities was most consistently cited as the primary reason narrators created online bookish accounts. So what we're hearing is that, we've got what we were talking about before with these reader groups. There's an incentive to just continue to have more and more of the thing that you love. But for folks like content creators and narrators and I think authors too, building more and more connections means more and more work opportunity. Right? Like the larger base you have to some degree, or there's this theory that the larger base you have to some degree is going to make more work for you. And in fact, you had shared with me like a giant study that this person had done about these online bookish spaces and what they found. And I maybe you can say what it is. I don't remember what the title of it was. But they had found in that exactly what we just said to be true, that authors, I think it was authors in this particular question that they were asking this to,
Mm-hmm.
were finding that most of their readers were connecting with their work on social media. Like that was the prime marketing space for their
Mm-hmm.
work. So how do you reach more people in that prime marketing space? You have more followers, right? Like more people are going to find your work if that's where they're going to look for books, to look for audiobooks, to look for narrators that they love. Then the more people that are seeing that content, the more that content will be consumed.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
And that survey, and that survey I'm going to talk about in a little bit here, but that was done by a Substack called Charlie's Marketing Rex.
Mm. Shout out to Charlie.
Shout out to Charlie. Thanks for the hard work.
Yeah, it was awesome. Super informative. So not only are people finding jobs on social media, but they're finding opportunities for as a creative outlet. From one person we heard, it's allowed me to connect with and make friends with people that I otherwise wouldn't know existed. And it's also allowed me to learn so much about the romance community and audiobook community. It also allowed me a creative outlet I didn't know I needed. Most readers told us they came to either stay up to date on releases from their favorite narrators and authors, or to creatively express what they love about books through edits, memes, and video content.
Mm-hmm.
And as we said before, in-person meetups, opportunities to share space with one another is always the most impactful in terms of creating community. Or that's what we're hearing from people. That's what we've experienced on our own. And so as we were talking about before, in-person gatherings, events are really where building community is most impactful, or rather, those are the most impactful opportunities for building community. At Book Bonanza, we sat down with a bunch of people and talked about a lot of this stuff. Those are the clips that you've been hearing. And one of the big things that came up was the power of in-person events and what is gained by attending them. And we wanted to share some more of those snippets with you.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
How much of going to these events in person is about also meeting and seeing other readers in real life that you only interact with online?
A lot. In fact, I have so many friends that I actually haven't met.
Yeah.
from online and books and all my different sites. And
Is it like a really satisfying experience?
Always.
When you're just like, oh, this is you in real life.
Does it feel like you're meeting just like old friends?
all the time.
How do you find out about what events are going on?
We follow a lot of.
So if an author that you like says, I'm signing at or I'm going to be at, that's how you find out about the events? Okay.
And sometimes I actually go because of narrators.
One thing that people loved about conventions and mentioned to us was this idea of collector culture, that I can go to this event, get this special edition, or I crafted this item that I made and I'm collecting signatures from all of these writers or narrators that I really like. But that collector culture seems to have a dark side when it comes to kind of aftermarket sales, whether or not you're talking about exclusive editions that are specific to just these events or the tickets to the events themselves.
Because I've seen people reselling exclusive, hardcovers.
I've seen that too. And it's like, I get reselling tickets and reselling at face value, because there's always going to be people who buy tickets and then can't go.
Yeah.
Especially when you sell tickets a year in advance, right? Yeah. But then it's the collector culture of I have to get that or I have to get there that drives up that demand. And it's like, I don't know, it reminds me of, remember when concert tickets, when people would buy up 30 concert tickets because they knew that they could sell them at exorbitant prices.
Yeah.
And then Ticketmaster started cracking down on you could buy a maximum of 5 and you could get the fees and everything. And I think it's the same thing now with events too.
Yeah.
Because even events I've seen, they limit how many tickets you can buy.
We also got to have a chat with a great book club that stopped by and talked about how and why they went online to find community.
So, and I didn't have anybody to talk to. So when I made that first video, I was just so overfull, that I just y'all. Somebody, and I was really, and oral fixation. That's why I put y'all. Somebody has to know. Did you hear it? So that's where it's like, I have to talk to somebody. I have to talk to somebody, because talking to my girlfriends who don't know what I'm talking about.
Did you get a response to that in oral fixation?
Yeah.
Did you find your people who wanted to talk to you about that?
Yeah.
And this idea of finding your people, kind of speaking out on the internet to say, does anybody else feel this way or think this way? Can I talk to somebody about this? Was echoed time and time again. Here's another example.
Vomiting out what I was reading, like, oh my God. Is anyone else listening to what I'm listening to? Did you hear what happened to this?
Yes.
And I remember one of my first posts in AF, Oral Fixations, was I was reading Amy Dahl's book, and the part was getting good, and I was driving down the road listening to it in audio, and my husband was in the car, and I was like, can you stop talking? Because he is breaking up with her in my other ear, and you are causing me drama. So as soon as I dropped him off, I was like, Lord have mercy, do you hear that? If anybody could see me in the car, I was like, but that, and I was telling everybody my experience, and I think people were like, oh, people do the same thing I do. People scream at people in the car. People, cross their eyes like, did you say that? And that's what AF was for us, is 13,000 other people that were doing the same thing.
So there's this great energy that I can go online and I can post about this experience and find people who feel the same. But the other side of this that we started to hear from some people was that, okay, well, now I'm posting all the time. And now there seems to be this growing unspoken rule of engagement that is starting to take on a darker shape.
This continued cycle is because this is the algorithm of social media.
Yes.
If you are not posting every day, all the time, posting on stories, posting on Instagram, posting
And
on
I knew that would
TikTok,
happen. And I
all
was just
that,
like, whatever.
then your algorithm
It
kicks
got
you
to
out.
feel like a job. It got to feel like a job. Like, I have to keep up with all these folks. I was on so many teams. I have to listen, or I have to do this. And it was like, this is not fun anymore for me.
So we started to hear from some of those quotes from our Book Bonanza conversation, both the opportunities and great things, but also they started to highlight some of the challenges of being a part of community that is tied, either online or offline for these. So while there are great ways and reasons to find your community online and in person, there are challenges. So in a recent survey, the one that we just talked about, by Charlie's Marketing Rex. That's what it's called. It's a Substack. Substack. Words. So it was flagged that they asked a question about screen time and how much you checked in. And there were a huge amount of people that were checking in, kind of like on the hour, multiple times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And one could make a connection that if you are considering that amount of screen time, along with some recent news that has come out from the Surgeon General about recommending warning labels for social media use, particularly for young people, it's hard to not connect the dots to mental health and social media use. So I think we don't have any hard facts on the impact of this on this particular community, but I think just as an overarching perspective, we have data that says this community is online a lot, multiple times. A large percentage of people who reported in the survey are checking in multiple times a day or an hour. And we've got somebody over here, the Surgeon General, saying and that might be, possibly dangerous to your health, so keep an eye on it.
Sorry, just to interject for a second. I feel like, we should fact check this, but I'm pretty sure it did say compared to other communities of people, the bookish community happens to be checking in more online than other communities said that they do.
Yes.
And it seemed like, based off of the conversations we've been having with people about why they turn to online spaces and how they turn to online spaces, if that's where your community is, if that's where your people are, and that's how you connect with them, it makes a lot of sense to me that we're seeing people show up in higher numbers more frequently in this space.
Mm-hmm. Are you familiar with the term third space?
No.
So third space is the idea that your primary space is your home, your secondary space is your school or your work, and the third space is like the community space where, the neighborhood park or, places where community gathers.
Mm-hmm.
And there is an online conversation in various communities that is questioning the validity of or the impact of the internet taking the place of third spaces in our lives or third places in our lives. And I have no facts on this, just, see it as a part of the general conversation in my own bubble of the internet. But that there is a discourse that's happening, and I'm sure that there is research happening that I am curious to dig into on like what happens when community is solely online. And to your point, I'm going to be incentivized to check constantly if it's my social outlet. I can say like personally, and that was really informed when we heard from a lot of people post-pandemic, during the pandemic, it really normalized that behavior as well. Especially if you feel like I can't connect to anybody in person, like that person earlier said, I'm pretty sure nobody around me likes to read these books. But then if I feel like I've found my people online, don't you want to spend as much time with your people as you can? Like,
Right.
it logically makes sense.
Right. And to speak to what we were just talking about before about DMs and the data that you were sharing about or when you were talking about those channels or whatever, and how there's this data on people who respond more in their DMs have a larger audience. So if we know that the consumers of the thing that you're making are spending more time online because that's where their community is, they're going to be engaging with your content more. And if you are someone who is paying attention to, how is my showing up in online space affecting or building more work for me or supporting my work, you then are going to show up online more as well, or there's at least more of a push to do so, right, to kind of keep that cycle going.
And that kind of snowball effect actually ties into like another challenge that I think happens as you are primarily finding your community online, which is that as you start to like keyword yourself into a corner to increase views or engagement, then you really do start to shape your bubble of inputs and respond to what you think the norm is. And the next episode, we're going to dig deep on the idea of etiquette and standards, but like the very nature of showing up online and the idea of going viral and viral culture means that the communities you're a part of impact your taste and perspectives and what you think, quote unquote, everybody is talking about. Everybody that you can see in your feed. Like, let's be clear, like and I think we all know consciously that that's how the internet works, but sometimes it's easy to forget when you're in it. So like, it can be as simple as your tastes are going to be informed by the book club you're a part of because the books that book club decides we're going to read this month. It can also mean that the most vocal advocates online are skewing your perspective on whether or not something's popular just because they've created a lot of content around it. And so you're seeing it in your feed a lot, or if they've bought a lot of ad space, so you think, oh, well, this is a thing that, we must be doing or participating in. There's a really great recent, I think it was like a Vox investigation. It was like Today Explained about Spotify and their algorithm, which is very applicable to, I think, just algorithm thinking in general. And it talks very specifically how the snowball effect happens so easily that the robot, the AI is not smart enough to know that like you don't actually care about that thing. But if the person before you liked it and you both also like this other thing, then the robot's going to say, oh, then you probably like this too. And nobody actually likes the original thing, but the robot keeps serving it because it thinks there's enough clicks or responses to it. So I think it can really skew things because you're not having real one-on-one conversations. And another example of this is like hashtags going viral. So we talked about this last month, a little bit. June is audiobook month, hashtag JIAM. You can be fed a lot of that thinking that a lot more people are participating and that you're somehow missing out because you're not, just because of the way that you've keyworded yourself to say, I'm interested in these types of things. The algorithm is going to show you just that specific content. I think another challenge about being online in these communities is that as more folks find valuable careers as content creators and as narrators start creating content and getting in this space, many who came for the just book club creative communities are starting to feel pushed out. So one thing we heard from someone was that I have to continually tell myself that the reviews I write and the content I create is because I love this community and these books. It is not a job for me, so I shouldn't be expected to keep up with certain influencers who use this space as a career. This is a hobby for me and I love it, which is hard sometimes to be seen when others have a much bigger following. And I think that idea of being seen, validating your creative expression is a kind of pernicious thought. And also you see it pop up with this idea of your expectation to consume lots of content. If your job as a content creator is to read books and post about them, my job as a narrator is to read books and narrate them. My appetite for consumption is higher because that's literally my job. If you're somebody like this person who has told themselves that the reviews and the content they create is just because they love it and it's their hobby, they should not be expected to read that many books. But some feedback that we got from people said on this expectation of content consumption, I feel like I need to keep up with the number of books read, etc., from content creators. I think another big possible challenge that we saw come up was when this idea that community can sometimes feel like a mob. This idea that we heard from narrators and authors, which said that this feeling of accessibility that we have in connection via DMs or elsewise means that you have to answer for any number of things. That could be a geopolitical thing. That could be something specific to the community. This idea of having pressured to have an opinion we heard come up a number of times in conversation. And as your colleagues take public stances on issues, you start to feel pressure to show up from peers and also other readers. One quote that we had from somebody who answered our survey was, "The most challenging thing about showing up in this community is probably when other creators demand things of me. Statements, opinions about issues that I may know nothing about, having very little knowledge or don't know a lot about, or not at liberty to share. Just because someone puts themselves online doesn't mean they have to be all things to everyone."
So I heard something similar from a reader that I spoke to at Book Bonanza, this feeling that there's a shift in that readers have to have opinions as well, not just about the content, but about sort of the business of it all, and let's see, like pushing this. I think we'll get into this more in our like sort of ethics and rules of engagement episode. But this expectation that we need to advocate for, I don't know, better pay for narrators or equal pay, or, we need to stand up for this author in XYZ situation, that there's some expectation, or that for this particular person, they feel an expectation imposed on them from the rest of the community to speak up in these ways, which I thought, we've had this conversation, and we hear this a lot with folks who are making the content. So a content creator, a narrator, an author. But I think something that is talked about less is this sort of community pressure with one another to engage in these ways as well. We see this, as you said, in like geopolitical instances and all kinds of stuff outside of Romancelandia. You see that on social media all the time, that individuals feel compelled to speak up on XYZ thing because everyone else around them is doing it. And other people are explicitly saying, if you stay silent in this, then you are a wrongdoer. Then I'm assuming you're a wrongdoer, right? That I'm assuming I understand your point of view, and it is not the same as mine because I chose to speak up. And so what I was hearing in this conversation was there's a similar feeling of that. Like, if I don't speak up and advocate in these ways, that says something about how I feel about a particular situation. When really, according to this person, they're saying, that's not what I'm here for. I'm here to read my books and enjoy my books and talk about my books. And I didn't sign up to be an advocate for anyone or anything or any cause. I just want to talk about the things that I love.
Yeah. And I think that there's a feeling, somebody else I talked to at Book Bonanza who basically used to make a lot more content, than life happened and they stopped making as much. And they were saying that they were really grateful that they had already made this in-person connection with their book club group that started online, because there's this feeling that even if you're a casual fan, if you're not posting something, to your earlier point, that basically has a badge that says, this is what I'm into, that you then don't feel that you are a part of that community. It can feel easy to be like pushed out of that. And so then when you wear the badge that says, this is what I'm into, then there becomes this increased pressure to be like, okay, great, that's what you're into. And everybody who says they're into this needs to also advocate for, double chocolate on their s'mores. Like, it becomes a big pressure thing. And I think that then gets into an issue of like virtue signaling, which again, I think we'll dig into a little bit more precisely next time. But a danger then becomes these deal breakers and rules that you've joined this community. And now this community says, well, we do this. These are the rules of this community. And that can be really tough to navigate. And for anybody, I think, whether or not you're a reader, a content creator, a narrator, an author. I had a conversation with a narrator that I think is really actually rare and hard to have if your only interaction with somebody is online and you don't have a face-to-face, relationship. But we were disagreeing on something, and it basically worked out in the end of saying like, okay, well, thanks for letting me know. I respect you, even if I disagree with that choice. But like that level of nuance of like disagreement, I think is really hard, if not impossible, to get online when we start to say, just repost this thing, or, this is the content you have to put out if you're a part of this community. Another kind of danger that came up, or, possible challenge to navigate in terms of being a part of these communities, is sharing yourself with strangers. You don't know really who someone is if you only interact with them online. But as online spaces become the only place that many of us can find community, you start to run into this challenge of needing to hold space for somebody you've never met, and also risk sharing your own vulnerable truths with total strangers. I spoke with a narrator who spends a lot of time answering DMs and forming connections that way, and said it was really difficult sometimes wanting to be there for somebody, but having a reader really open up unprompted about some very personal information that then they felt was kind of difficult and dangerous to hold on to and help them navigate. And also there have been any number of stories and conversations that I've had with then other narrators about how, well, if I'm having this conversation here in this private context, well, it seems private, but somebody can take that information and go have whatever, can use that wherever they want. So I think it's something, online safety is a general thing to remember in this day and age. And especially I think in these communities where you feel like so relieved because you found somebody and you feel so connected to them because you felt really alone in this interest. One of the challenges can be like, well, you can presume a lot about the person on the other side without actually having done that work. Which then, okay, well, how can you do that? Let's meet them in person. Conventions are a great way to meet people in person meetups, but they also come with the challenge of being expensive and, really cost prohibitive for a lot of people to attend to, both for attendees, like the readers themselves, or for authors and narrators going. And it also creates like a hotbed of issues if like, we all saw a lot of stories that were coming out of Readers Take Denver in 2024. And that's like, from organization and any number of issues that we saw there. And then 2023 Book Bonanza also had some issues around community and how people were engaging there. And I think, those can be challenging spaces when you bring that many people together around this, no matter how they are. So, I think there are a lot of possible challenges to navigate, as many as there are so many beautiful things about finding your community online and in person.
Yeah, so I think let's pivot a little bit to our own experiences within that, and in particular in-person community. You and I have attended a number of conventions together and also separately. I'm curious to hear from you, Samantha, how you decided or how you decide which places to attend, which conventions to attend, and what kind of community you're looking for there. What opportunities and challenges come from attending those for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think same as you, right? So where you said earlier, like being able to meet other narrators is a big part of this, right?
Yeah.
I think the community I'm looking for first and foremost is I think that narrator community. I think there's the work we do together is specific and intimate, and I think it's important for me to, as much as possible, make those connections if I can with people. And that's it makes me feel less alone in this work. And then secondly, I think it was really important for me to put a face and whatever to meet a full human behind the listeners, because for me, at least in my work, if I'm telling a story here, it's much easier to like imagine a person that I'm telling that story to. And it's important for me to better understand the type of people that are listening to these stories and spending a lot of time with us. And I find those connections personally really invaluable. I haven't had as much opportunity. Like I would say meeting authors is a huge interest of mine, but I don't think the in-person conventions I've quite had as valuable or as I haven't had such good luck building up my relationships with authors that I haven't worked with.
Right.
What about you? Like, what kind of communities are you hoping to meet and build at these on-person ones?
Yeah, definitely what you said, narrators for sure. And that getting to kind of meet face-to-face the folks that listen to my work is huge and impactful on the work that I do, because you can imagine those people as your, a lot of the books that we record, especially first-person POV, you are talking to somebody, right? And so when you can know who the person is that has us in their ears, you can imagine talking to them and telling them, recounting this story that this character is telling them. For me, authors are a big motivator. I like to go to, this isn't always the case, but my preference is to go to conventions where I know there are going to be authors that I've worked with before, especially ones I've never gotten to meet before, because there are plenty of authors whose books I have narrated for years, who I've never spoken to, I've never met. Maybe we've had some email exchanges. Nowadays, maybe we've had some DM exchanges, on Instagram. But it's a strange thing to share, to bring someone's intimate inner thoughts and ideas and creativity to life and not know that person at all. And so I always get really excited about meeting those folks and getting to talk to them. I also think, just from a practical perspective, if there are authors there who I've worked with, or whose books I've narrated, then there's more likely going to be people who are interested in having me sign something of theirs. And therefore, it makes more sense for me to go there. I don't, it doesn't matter one way or another to me how many books I'm signing.
Right.
But there is, people want to go there to meet the people they want to meet. And so if they're getting books from one author and they can also get it signed by the narrator who narrated that book, I think there's a lot of value in that for everyone. So that feels of interest to me.
Because also if part of it is wanting to meet people who are listening to these books.
Right.
I want to go to a convention where there's at least a couple authors that I've worked with, so that I'm more likely to meet those listeners.
Absolutely. It's a whole different, and I've had this experience too. It's a different experience going to a convention where maybe there aren't a lot of audiobook listeners, or they aren't, or they haven't listened to my books specifically. And it's a very different experience. It's also wonderful in other ways, but you spend a lot of time answering questions about, well, who are you? How do I know you? What have I listened to of yours? And that's just a different kind of experience that doesn't always feel as fulfilling to me as getting to connect with people about books that they loved, that I got to perform, and we get to kind of geek out on all the things we loved about those books. It's just like a different thing. I would say also for me, I have found that more work comes my way after I attend conventions. A lot of times that work is coming from other narrators who are also producers. So we're getting to meet for the first time. We're building a connection. And you want to work with the people right? Like there's a comfort level there. There's a trust there. Maybe they already know my body of work, but they didn't know me. And so now we know one another. We have a rapport. And if we're going to be collaborating, that's really important. So that has come up for me. And I have tried to really make use of the times where I've been at in-person events, and there's been built-in time to make connections between authors and narrators. I try to really take advantage as best I can of those moments, because I'm like, if I'm here, this is the opportunity. Here's an author whose work I love. I'm going to go tell them that, and and talk about their work with them. And for me personally, I'm not a hard sell kind of person. I don't want to go around and asking people for work, but again, it's
Rose
just,
Dioro, audiobook narrator. I've read your book.
my
Let me
God.
just tell you, I'm a personable voice in it.
That's right. No, that's definitely not my style. But it is when you have a chance to just have a real conversation with somebody
Mm,
about anything, you're going to make a lasting connection or
yes.
at least a memorable moment. And I think that in any industry, that leads to more work or more projects or whatever the thing is. And I've certainly found that for myself. Um,
I like to prioritize too. Like I'd say for me, like I think if you have a panel component, like
yes, totally.
I'm less interested now that I've been to a number of these. I think I'm kind of done unless the narrator's going and some of the authors going are people that like I really want to meet or have the
Mhm,
chance to see or something like that.
mhm,
Um, I really don't think I'm going to go to one that is only signing. To me, the
mhm.
value of being able to I had this like great conversation with my sister-in-law the last couple weeks. She's like she discovered romance books in the last couple years. And she was like, she didn't know conventions existed. And she saw the swag I had in my office and I was talking to her about them. And she, like me, shared this thing of like, oh, well, I actually really would love to go and listen to people talk and dig into this work and the writing process or any of these things. So like, I really like a convention that has some sort of, no matter how small, a panel component. Because I think that obviously, if you can't tell, we like the discourse.
Yeah, absolutely. I 100% agree. That's one of the things that I always loved most about Book Bonanza, in fact,
Mm,
because that was the first convention I had attended that had panels. And I felt like, if you have a goal of people getting to know who you are, know your work, just know you as a person, that's a great way to reach a lot of people, right? That's a
mhm.
great way to really get to express your inner thoughts, your inner life, and share a bit of who you are. It also just is a space that I feel most comfortable in that kind of setting. Because as you said, like you and I both share this love for discussion, right?
Mhm.
And it's really exciting. Something I've noticed and loved about being on those panels is you also really get to you see so many faces in front of you of the people that
Mm,
are the consumers of the stuff that we make, and you
mhm,
get to see what they're responding to in conversation, and I find
mm,
that so exciting and informative too. Like, oh, I'm hearing, I'm seeing people nod profusely about this book that I just mentioned,
Yeah, yeah.
like this is a book that people are really into. I wouldn't have known that. I didn't know anyone heard of this book. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. There's a lot of
Yeah.
information you gather just by observing the audience in front of you and seeing what they get excited about,
Mhm.
seeing when they lean in to hear more. Oh, this is so like this behind the scenes thing we're talking about is really of interest to them. Um, I feel like I walk away with so much joy and so much information from panels like that. So I
Yeah,
really
we
like
talked
that
a lot I
too.
mean, we've talked a lot about the opportunities that come and what we really enjoy about the in-person community events, and conventions specifically. Because I think there's a
Mhm.
whole other thing of, I haven't done any narrator retreats,
Me
and so, like, I
neither.
can't really speak to, like, the opportunities and challenges of that. There used to be a group, in New York that was called, like, the Ladies of Audiobooks, that pre-pandemic met, like, kind of regularly. That was like a nice in-person like community thing that like was again for the sole purpose of narrator to narrator connection. But
Mhm.
for the conventions themselves, for you, are like besides like money and logistics, are there other challenges that present like through this lens of like community and finding your community in person that you can think of?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, certainly a challenge is the energy it takes of just
Mm,
being, all the talking, all the greeting, all the smiling, all the stuff. It's
mhm,
lovely and it's also overwhelming. I'm sort of an extroverted introvert, like
mhm, mhm,
I love being around people, but I tend toward one-to-one or like deep conversation. I don't do small talk well. I
mhm.
don't like it. It doesn't feel good to me. It feels very draining to me. And so the way I think you could show up at a convention and that's what you're doing a lot of is all this small talk. And I tend to not, but it took me a couple rounds to figure that out. They're like, oh no, I just want to be, here's this cocktail hour that a ton of people are attending. I'm just going to stand in this corner and have a 45-minute conversation about who knows what with this person I just met. That feels great to me, and gives me a lot of energy. But without that, the sort of just, I'm here to just sign this, like you said, if it's just like I'm sitting and I'm signing and I'm not meeting anyone, I'm not like doing panels or like having opportunity for longer conversation. Some of the conventions where like the narrator lines are super long, and so you just you sign the book and move on. Those are very draining for me, and I find that to be really challenging. And they also just don't feel as like as fruitful of an opportunity. And I sort of wonder, like, okay, well, maybe this one isn't the right one for me, and maybe I'm not coming back to this.
Yeah,
right? You know?
for sure. What other communities do you feel like, okay, so that's like in person, like online, but like, are there other communities? I'm sure there are communities outside of romance audiobooks or narration that you may or may not be a part of. Are there communities that you consider yourself a part of that are specific to romance audiobooks?
Yeah, certainly narrator communities, like Facebook groups. I have found, even before I was a narrator, just VO groups too, less so in the theater space. I think that came much later. Now there's some sort of online spaces that I connect with for theater. But in the VO space, because it's a digital medium, I started out in like LinkedIn voiceover chat groups. That was like I think that was my first foray into any kind of community space in that way that I can think of. And it wasn't very, like, I didn't make any friends in that group, but I felt like I didn't recognize anyone in that group, but I gathered a ton of information. Like I got to know what I was getting. This is when I was first starting in VO. I got to understand the business more. I felt like I had a place to turn to, that sort of the quote from the author we had earlier about like, am I
getting fucked or am I crazy?
Right. Like that was where I could go to kind of ask those sort of questions. And in entering into narration, I found a lot of spaces like that. And those do feel like community to me. At least a couple times a week, I'm like, ooh, I have this question. I'm going to go search and see if someone in this group has talked about this before. And if they haven't, I'm going to ask my question. And I know I'm going to be met with some really helpful responses, some caring responses. And so that really feels like community to me. But I don't think, I think that's kind of it beyond the stuff we've already talked about for me, because I'm just not an online person. I really we talked about this before in earlier episodes in this sort of deep dive. I don't show up online in a personal way. And even when I'm talking about with these community spaces, it's less personal and still more geared toward work. But I have a personal rapport with a lot of the people that I'm interacting with, and I know many of them, in real life. So that those feel like my people in a lot of ways, but I don't post on my personal Facebook. I don't post anything. Just don't use online in that way. So I think that's kind of it for me. What about you?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm even worse than you. Like, I feel like I'm in the narrator groups that I am a part of, I'm a pretty consistent lurker. And do know that they are a place that if I was like, oh, I really have this question, or I have something that I want to share, or I need help with like a casting thing, I feel like I'll reach out to them. But in a real, like, am I getting fucked or am I crazy situation, I actually go to much smaller networks. So those are like, my communities are like text groups, and really more direct, like one-on-one connections that I have made from working together and forming those in-person connections. Because I think I'm pretty transparent, and like keep the layer of my private self like pretty close. Like you can get pretty close to who I really am and information about me. I'm pretty open about that. But the people who are sort of beyond then that close bubble are pretty tiny. And sometimes, depending on the sensitivity of the thing, like those are the only people I kind of want to trust and talk to about this stuff. Kind of to the earlier thing of like, you kind of don't know who somebody is on the internet. And in some of these groups, as they grow, I don't know who's a member of this group. So I don't
Right.
know, where that information is growing. So that's like one of the challenges for me about community. I was invited early on and I joined early on and I sort of did it less and less as just I had to manage my online time. But like part of the groups that are tied to the conventions that we go to and see the conversations that kind of happen around there, and which I think is like an interesting micro community because it's around an event itself. And then also other like author and narrator fan pages. Like I don't have a community that I manage myself around Samantha Brentmore, but there's a lot of my colleagues, yourself included, that have these that like I join and I kind of see, okay, well, what kind of they've invited me to them, and I've either done chats with the groups or something like that. So then I can kind of see just how people are talking to each other. I think like that's really so yeah, like kind of a lurker in communities, and then a lot of one-on-one. I have a lot of like personal conversations, whether or not they're in DMs or in texts, is really where stuff goes for me, community-wise. Yeah. Just at the lunch table, talking to you forever. Just like, let's get into no matter who you are, I'm going to be like, and then your uncle moved to Florida, and how is that? Like, I'm always going to be like that jerk. But speaking of groups, okay, so you have this group, the Rosebuds. It's a Facebook group. I think a lot of people have perspectives and opinions, and everybody's group is different.
Right.
But I'm curious for you, like, how did you form this community, and kind of like, what is it about, and how do you run it, and how do you feel like, or maybe you can't speak to this, but how does it differ from others or is the same as others?
Yeah. Well, I didn't form it. I had an author reach out to me and asked me if it would be okay to start a group for me. And I was like, very surprised by that question. It was lovely. It was a lovely gesture. I said yes. I think even at the time I said to her, I don't know what to do with like a fan. Like, I don't know about fans. That's not a word that I use, for people that listen to my stuff. Like, I don't know. But if that's something you want to do, that's lovely. Go right ahead. And she did, and it was wonderful. And people joined it, and I was surprised. Like, okay, now this thing exists. But she wasn't able to, because of some stuff on her end, like going on with her, she wasn't able to kind of, after a while, keep it moderated or whatever. So that stuff was happening in there. And I thought, okay, well, this group exists already. These people are here. I actually know quite a few of them personally. Like, we've met several times in person, whatever. I guess I will make it what I want it to be. You know? And it's not like I said, fan group, I don't know. That just doesn't track for me. I want it to be a community space. I want it to be a place where I can ask people a bunch of questions, or they can ask me a bunch of questions. And I started doing, I think once we started this podcast, it kind of was too many things, too much talking and too much repeating myself. So I was like, I'm not doing this as much anymore. But for a while I was doing these regular lives in there. I would ask people like, what topic do you want to discuss? And sometimes I'd bring folks on with me and we'd have, chats. I was very actively reading what people were writing in the chats. And so we were communicating directly. And it's that thing that I do that I already described of like, I'm going to stand in the corner and talk to this person for 45 minutes about whatever topic. That's what the group was for me. And then it became, for a while we were sharing the roundtable in there. And that was great and really in line with the way I was sort of shifting the shape of the group to be. Like, it is about conversation and community. And now it's really just a way for me to like, actually a lot of the stuff we talk about or that we're talking about in this deep dive, I get to ask people those questions in that group too. Like, and about, I have a lot of curiosity around how people choose what they read, where they're going, like, where are they finding community? How are you learning about new narrators? Is that something you have interest in, and why? And people are responding to those questions. And then I get to ask them a bunch of follow-up questions and they respond and we get to have conversations. And that feels great to me. Like, it is just a way, it's a little like, no, I guess it's not at all. I was going to say it's like that channel thing, but it's not, because I actually want to hear.
It's the reverse. It's like the reverse of the channels, because the channel says, I'm just a billboard, basically, that you can interact with in a very limited way. And your group is actually like, I actually have questions for you. And this is my way of engaging with the community to like get more insights on the community I'm a part of and the people who are consuming that content, which I think is a really valuable touch point. Because I think we as narrators can be really disconnected, right? There's a level of narrator that works that it doesn't even show up online. And it's like, I do the work and that's that. Then there's another level that like has social media, but like doesn't do any engagement, right? They like maybe post about a release here or there. They have social media so they can show up to a live if they're invited or something like that, but they're not really genuinely like probing the community that they're a part of, that they're really informing. And I'm not saying that like that's bad or good. I'm just saying that like you can do this work and be really disconnected from the community itself. And then you go further and further and further to like, you know, crazies like us that are like, come here, I want to like understand, like, what was the first book that you which is really lovely and feels very like different and very community focused. I mean, like I've seen some fellow narrators who do a great job of like, it's on a kind of like you were saying, like a regular schedule, like here's my weekly questions, here's a little bit about you know, who I am. Like I think Connor Crace does a great job of this in his group, where you see him, he does a release, he gives you like a little bit about his personal life, and the only people that are getting that access are the people that are in this group. And then he like opens it up to like a community question of like, tell me what you're XYZing. And he does like a fair amount of like tagging things in there. So like I'm often tagged in books that like we work on together. And so like I can pop in there and feel like I'm like a friendly neighbor who was like, oh, hey guys, we're talking about baking recipe as well. And it feels like a community that you want to participate in, which is like a nice thing to do. Well, speaking of community, we hope that today's conversation inspires you to gather your community together and reflect on these questions and conversations about community.
Sam and I are going to continue this deep dive on the next episode, where we will focus in on the rules of engagement for these communities online and in person.
We want to better understand how we interact online and in person and who or what informs that.
You're not going to want to miss it. So be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice so you are alerted when that and all future episodes go live.
Thanks for listening.
You're not going to want to miss it. So be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube. I messed this up in our last episode too, everybody. So be sure to subscribe to our channel on YouTube or your podcast platform of choice. This is the exact same thing.
I know. She's a professional word reader.
You can never tell.
Never.
I'm going to start this over.
Yeah. Do you want to just do the whole ending again?
Yeah. Let's
okay.
I'm starting to melt.
I'm so sweaty. It's hilarious. It's not even funny.